Hi everyone, I am Bhumika and today we have with us Vinod Shankar. He's a fellow chartered accountant and a CFA charter holder as well. He's also the Career Services Chair on the board of CFA Society Emirates. He co-founded Genesis, one of the most reputed CFA prep provider in the Middle East, which was recently sold to Kaplan. Besides that, he is also a platform speaker, trainer, mountaineer, blogger, and podcaster at the Real Finance Mentor. We are very delighted to have you here with us, Vinod. Welcome to our channel.
Thank you so much, Bhumika, for having me on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have a lot to cover today. My
I
first
know.
question to you is you started off in industrial banking and then moved to audit with the big four firms, big five then. So, what is audit for you?
What is audit for me? Well, it's quite a few things. The pluses and minuses, right, with every experience that you have.
Hmm.
So, I spent about 6 years in audit between, say, 1997 and 2003.
Okay.
And I worked in KPMG, I worked in Anderson and Ernst & Young, both in India, in Oman, and in Dubai. So quite a few interesting things that comes to mind, right? First of all, the positives. The positive is that you work in different industries. In every industry was different, so there was some variety.
Hmm.
Also, I like to get know more about different businesses, business drivers, the risks, the competition. That again, that sort of added to your knowledge, made you more interested in things.
Hmm.
There was a small element of financial analysis as well, right, in auditing,
Yes.
especially when you do the analytical review,
Hmm.
where you link the numbers to the business reality, you explain why revenue or profits have gone up or gone down, right? And of course, the human connection was very important. I like connecting with the clients. Many of them were engaging and quite insightful, the guys who I met during the audits. And of course, once you got past the initial challenge of understanding the client, right, things were much faster and smoother, and you could look deeper. I mean, you could specialize, you could add value to the client. So I ended up specializing in the audit of five-star hotels, Intercontinental, Radissons, Hiltons, and so it got the better you knew the systems and the client and the business, the smoother and faster the audit, and you could go deeper beyond the normal tick box process oriented audits.
Yeah.
So those were the positives. The negatives, of course, and I think you've seen me mentioning that on LinkedIn or social
Yeah.
media as well,
Yeah.
quite a few times, and I'm not going to pull my punches when I talk about the negatives.
Yeah.
Look, there is, first of all, there's a massive conflict of interest, right? Auditors are being paid by the same entity that they are auditing.
Yeah.
So, as you can imagine, they are they're not going to be able to expose frauds or errors. And as a result, if you look at the past 30 years, very few accounting scandals have been unearthed by auditors. They're probably unearthed by whistleblowers or journalists or someone like that, right?
That's true.
That's so whether it's Enron or WorldCom or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or Satyam in India, for example.
Mm.
The second issue, which actually affected us as auditors individually, was the extremely tight and very unrealistic deadlines that you had to follow in audit. And that is because of the fact the audit firm used to bid for audits with very low fees to win the audit. And also because of year-end work, right? When I say year-end, not really the interim audits towards the not the audits before the end of the year, but the audits after the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When you have to go in and quickly look at the numbers because the management is in a tearing hurry to get the annual report out and hold AGM and declare dividend, blah, blah, blah. But then a lot of unrealistic pressure was on the auditors. The third negative that's inherent in audit work was because of this unrealistic deadlines, you could only do superficial work a lot of the time. So what does that mean? That means absurdly low sample sizes, shallow reviews of transactions, very hasty discussions among the audit team or with clients on key issues, which should have been discussed further ideally. And of course, audit has become a commodity. It's become a lost leader, right? Big four firms, other audit firms, they deliberately price audits low to get consulting work advisory, which is more lucrative. And you all know this, right? And of course, in audit, it's just the very nature of audit, I think. Doesn't matter whether it is in the Middle East or the US or India. The business model is very, how do you say, dysfunctional in a way because, I mean, it's a combination of sweatshop and turnstile. I say that, right? Because no one is expected to last there for long or rise up too much, right? As a result, no one really goes in, unlike other firms or other companies, no one really goes in hoping to be a partner or a director or a principal. I mean, they all go there to get the chapa and to get some experience and to meet people, and then they jump to a client like I did, or they go to some other sector. And of course, the worst part I found about audit, I think you have often, not always, often terrible managers and partners. And I mean that when I say terrible, let me be specific. They are quite often very shallow and incompetent, and they're quite often very insecure. And at least in my experience, of course, I can only speak from my experience, quite arrogant as well, because, chartered accountant or CPA, they've made it that level. They just need to delegate and supervise. And of course, I've worked with some brilliant audit managers who ended up being mentors as well. But at least in the Middle East, the quality of management staff in the Big Four leaves a lot to be desired. So that is my take on the positives and negatives of audit. But it's interesting what you asked me about what do I think of audit. So I think audit is a good, beginning for anyone starting a career, even planning a career in even financial services, because it gives you a very good feeling of the nuts and bolts of how the accounting system works, right?
That's true.
And you get a very good feel of the process, what goes in, what goes out, what could go wrong, disclosures, financial reporting standards. So if you really are diligent and interested, it's a fantastic foundation for things you do later in life. But again, it depends on how much you want to take out of it.
Yeah. That's true. That was like a very precise answer that you gave with all the positives and the negatives. So because we are talking about audit, and there was this report which was released recently. So as per the Future of Jobs Report 2020, which was issued by the World Economic Forum, auditing and accounting are predicted as redundant roles by 2025. So what is your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just that report, right? I mean, wherever you look, whoever you speak to, they say, you know what, auditing and accounting are going to be redundant. You're all going to be replaced by robots.
Yeah.
Then I had a chat with a Big Four partner a few weeks ago, and I've been researching as well. And my view, and of course I could be wrong, there's a forecast, right? Yeah. My view is that I don't think this will be happening that fast for many reasons. And I'll tell you why it won't happen that fast, and I'll tell you what could happen as well, right? Okay. So cheap skilled labor will delay automation. So if you look at, for example, whether it's India or the Middle East, and these are two markets I'm very familiar with, right? It's not difficult to get qualified staff. Let's put it this way: CPAs, chartered accountants, ACCAs. And because of that, there's no vast requirement or urgency on the part of management to implement automation at a high speed. Probably automation is more hassle and more expensive than getting done quickly through, 20 article clerks or 20 seniors or whatever. That's one point. Second point is I think AI is still very uncommon and still expensive. Yeah. But that's for now. I don't think that's going to remain for long. I think it will change. The pace of change, of course, is very difficult to predict. Yeah. But I think two things you can talk about. One is that junior level work will suffer the most in terms of they'll be the first to be replaced by machines, as everywhere else, right? Yeah. Routine, process-driven, predictable work, where you can pretty much tell a machine how to do it. So pretty much you can automate a process. That will be the first to be hit. But we still need senior, experienced human auditors, right? Yeah. To give opinions on judgments, estimates, and assumptions that fill our financial statements, right? I mean, think about fair values, right? Think about impairment adjustments, useful lives, accounting changes, changes in accounting standards or change in accounting policies, disclosures, accounting adjustments. I'm yet to see a robot that's quite capable of doing these things. And I think for that reason, you would need people who can not sort of tick boxes, more of probably, review, analyze, and give opinions. and as I told you, I also talked to a Big Four audit partner recently. And the view was that audit will still be done by humans, but it'll be more of reviewing the results of an AI program and then adding value to clients. So for example, AI will go through thousands of transactions, maybe hundreds of thousands of transactions, and pick anomalies, pick errors, and hence be able to prevent or detect frauds and errors, right? That's one thing. So if a machine is going to do all that donkey work, for lack of a better word, then what's left is basically, apart from what I talked about, the reviewing judgments, estimates, and assumptions. Yeah, exactly. Data analysis, data visualization, basically communicating with the client may become far more essential skills for auditors. So I think the ability to go through data, understand the results, and communicate them, that's going to be paramount, I think, going forward.
Yeah, that's really insightful, because as people, as a young professional who is working in audit, I think we definitely need to improve on data visualization and analysis part. Yeah, that's really nice. So let's go back to your journey. You rose to the position of an executive director and then decided to quit the corporate life. So tell us the story behind it.
Where do I start? So this was in, I think, 2009, 2008, when I turned 40, and people do crazy things when they turn 40. But I didn't do a crazy thing. So going back a bit, the story behind quitting corporate life. This was the height of the global financial crisis, Bhumika, right? So we're talking about 2008. And I sort of had spent about 16 years in corporate life by then. And I was sort of getting a bit stagnated, and I wasn't learning much. Then I got headhunted by a listed asset manager in the GCC as executive director of finance. I was managing a team of about 20 plus spread over the Middle East, North Africa region. It's an exciting role, senior role, great title, executive director, right? Fancy title.
Yeah.
Good pay. So I was there for about 4 months, not too long. But I quickly realized, and when you experience, you can pick up these things, right? When you talk to people. It was the company that's corrupt all the way to the top. Lack of operating freedom for me, very political organization. And of course, the worst part is a boss who was hypercritical, incompetent, insecure, and as well backstabbing. So plus I missed my friends in Dubai and the Dubai lifestyle. I wasn't in Dubai at this point, right? So this was the context, the background, right? So I was thinking, you know what? After a long unnecessary argument with my boss one day, I dwelt on all this one evening and the night. And I was thinking, why am I doing this, right? I was, and I'm still single, no wife, no kids, no baggage, otherwise. I had and still have a ridiculously Spartan lifestyle. I didn't need the money or the title. And then by that time, or at that time, my company, Genesis, the company that I sold, or we sold a few years ago, that was set up in 2008, July, well before I quit corporate life. So when I was in this state of mind as to should I leave corporate life or not, and what happens next, this company, Genesis, had already been running for about 9 months, 10 months. It was doing well, and it was catching up. Great feedback from students, CFA prep. So I called one of my co-founders and I said, listen, boss, this is my quandary right now. I'm at this situation. I don't have a job in hand, right? But the situation here is intolerable, at least for me. What should I do next? And he said, just come back to Dubai and run Genesis, take over as CEO. I mean, you love teaching. You're very good at teaching. So come back. And it was like somebody unshackled me, right? It was like, I mean, that feeling, I can't even begin to describe. It's like somebody literally said, you're free to go. Next day morning, I returned my BlackBerry smartphone. Just BlackBerry then, right? There was no iPhone at that point, really popular. I returned my BlackBerry phone, access card to the HR director. He was shocked because I was the only senior hire they had made in the last year. And I said, why? I told him why. He said, think it over. I thought it over. He said, go home and think about it for over the weekend. I thought about it. I came back after the weekend and said, I'm not changing my mind. I'm still leaving. So, Bhumika, there was a push and the pull, right? If you look at it overall, the push was corporate life. I've had enough of corporate life for the reasons I mentioned to you, right? The stress, the corruption, the lack of freedom. And the pull was entrepreneurship, freedom, teaching, right? So it is I think the pull won over the push, probably, as in, or they work together rather. Actually, I think they work together neatly. And I turned 40 at that time, right? So it was a perfect time. It didn't happen, but it was not planned. this wasn't planned. I'm just, some things happen in your life and you think, wow, that was a perfect timing. So this was perfect timing. And that was what, 11 years ago. So that was the story behind it. And probably it was that decision to move out of corporate life was one of the two best decisions I've ever taken in my life. No regrets so far. Yeah.
That was a really interesting story. So because you have mentioned corporate life, so what do you think are some aspects of corporate life which, if corrected, could lead to more satisfaction for both the employees and the employees?
Well, aspects of corporate life which, if corrected, okay. Well, that's a big thing, right? Because companies have different cultures and management on one hand, and employees have each a unique with unique personality on the hand, right? But it's an interesting question, actually. It's a very important question as well. So this is what I think, right? I think companies should promote someone to supervisory position only if that person is a people person. I've seen a lot of people who are very bright, very qualified, right? Very experienced, but they're very good, what you call individual contributors. They're brilliant at their own work. But you ask them to manage or motivate or lead a team, they screw up. And that happens a lot because people get promoted because of technical competence, not because they're good at managing people. So I think what should be corrected is this, and how it can be corrected is, I think a lot of people need training, mentoring, or coaching, as in before you are made a supervisor. It should be mandatory. I remember working with a lot of people, and you think, how did this guy ever become a manager? How did he get there? That's one thing. So I think that's one point, right? In terms of what companies should do. Second thing I've thought about is when I look around me, right, Bhumika, I see that certain temperaments are suited for certain careers, right? And certain temperaments and personalities are not suited for certain careers. So I'll give an example, right? Look, if you want to be big in investment banking, which is, a very seemingly sexy area for most finance grads, right?
That's right.
And yeah, there are a lot of positives about it, but you have to be resilient, mentally very tough, be willing to work 80-hour weeks, right? With zero work-life balance, be willing to tolerate clients and colleagues who are absolute, jerks, and basically be willing to burn yourself out over a period of 5 to 7 years. Now, of course, there are rewards, right? But people are not aware of what the job requires, apart from the technical qualifications. So that's what I call by fitness, right? Fitness, not physical fitness, but job fitness. So I think employers and employee should both ensure fitness of the employee for the company culture, and the role. I think a lot of the misery that you see at the workplace is due to this lack of fit, where people go in and they're like a square peg in a round hole, right? So I know, for example, I was not a great fit in audit because I'm not a huge believer in process. I'm not a huge believer in hierarchy. I'm more in outcomes and impact. God knows how would I survive for 6 years in audit. So that's the second point, right? First point was about, promote only if you're suitable. Second point was, ensure fitness. Third, I think is, this is an employee issue. I think, and that includes me as well. Employees should have realistic expectations, right? I mean, people go into companies thinking, my company is going to take care of me, take care of my career, ensure work-life balance, make sure I'm mentally and physically okay. That's not true all the time. Right? I mean, corporate life can be massively unfair. It can be very unfriendly with a lot of competition. It can be very unpredictable as well, right? You don't get the pay rise or the promotion or the training that you want when you want it, right? It's not a club or a family. And if you chase money, you should know that it comes at a price. So I think, of course, later in life, when you're in your 30s and 40s, you're mature enough to realize that. But when you're a fresh graduate or in your early 20s, mid 20s, you go with this wild-eyed perspective, and then you get kicked in the ass, right? Because you went with completely utopian, unrealistic expectations. That's completely on the employee, and you can't really blame the employer for that, because that's corporate life everywhere, right? So I learned that the hard way. And something else I learned the hard way, which again is on the employee, not the employer, is you shouldn't bet all your happiness on the job. As in, you shouldn't think that, your whole purpose of living, your purpose of existing is basically to meet deadlines and keep your boss happy and to prepare fantastic PowerPoints. I mean, that can't be, right? Have some hobbies, have a work-life balance, even in a small way. Because what I found in my way is, when I was so much involved, and this happened about 15 years ago, I was performing well. I was spending 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., 9 p.m. at work, 12 hours at work daily. And something happened at work that affected my promotions. And it almost devastated me mentally, affected my work. But now 15 years later, I'm looking at that and thinking, come on, really? A promotion issue? Yes, there was a bit of unfairness. And I've talked about that in my podcast, what happened behind it. And there were some people involved. But, relatively speaking, in the whole scheme of life, it's nothing. But of course, when you're in the middle of it, it's everything. And that's because at that point in time, I didn't have all these hobbies that, you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast. I wasn't into running or cycling or mountaineering or podcasting or nothing. I was this typical accounting nerd, right? Chartered accountant with absolutely no hobbies whatsoever apart from reading. So, and that is my 4 things, right? As in, companies should ensure that supervisors are fit for the job. Employer and employee must ensure fitness of the employee for the company and role. Employees must have realistic expectations. And please don't bet all your happiness, all your joy on your job. That's a recipe for volatility and unhappiness.
That's really interesting, because what you mentioned here is a mindset change for the employees, at least. That's a lot of mindset change that we require. All right. So when you decided to be an entrepreneur, and that too at the age of 40, what were some of the challenges that you faced? And on the basis of those challenges, what would be your advice for all the young budding entrepreneurs out there?
But first too, when you said that too at the age of 40, I mean, you make me feel very, very old. I mean, by the way, if you look at the research, I think most successful startups were started by people who were in the late 30s or 40s. There's some statistic I keep thinking, by the way. So, and such a simple reason is because they're mature, right? And they've experienced life. So they are able to handle startup. But going back to my advice for entrepreneurs, well, I can only, of course, speak from my experience, right, Bhumika? So from my experience, I think my transition from corporate life to entrepreneurship wasn't smooth. And in retrospect, I can think of a few reasons why. I think the number one reason, I think, was people management issues. So when you are, so I went from, what do you call, auditing senior, audit supervisor, finance manager, finance, executive director of finance, right? So, but then I realized that no one ever taught me how to manage people. There was no training. There was no mentoring involved. No one ever coached me. So one issue I had initially for the first few years was the whole aspect of motivating, directing, delegating, right? And getting work done through people without them getting pissed off at you, right? It seems very simple to do, but actually it's very complex.
That's true.
So I think I learned the hard way, without going into too much detail, that each person is different and you have to treat them differently. And you have to be very patient and tolerant and non-judgmental when you deal with people. Because people don't know what's happening in your mind, right? They only see what you say and what you do. And as a result, a lot of things get misinterpreted, mistranslated. And that's the cause of a lot of confusion and dysfunction at work, at least from my perspective. So I think one big learning was people management. How can an entrepreneur pick up from that? I mean, seriously, there's no course, right? It's not like CA or CFA that teaches you about these things. I think having a good mentor or maybe going through a good incubator or accelerator would help a lot. Reading, for me, reading always helped, and we'll talk about that as well later. I think we'll cover that. The second point was under delegation. So because I was very good at individual work, analysis, report writing, teaching. Those are my forte, right? I was exceptional at that. So I found that if I had delegate this, I was not very good at that. I would probably over criticize or take the work back, right? That was a problem. So under delegation was a problem. Sometimes I used to even over delegate, as in trust someone too much, right? And then that person would go and because of lack of direction, he or she would mess it up. So I think you need to know how much to delegate. I think that's a very fine balance. And that depends a lot upon who you're delegating it to. And I think as an entrepreneur, if you want to delegate work, you better make sure that you've trained that person or mentored that person. And you also have to expect some mistakes initially. That will happen. And there's no point getting wild or upset about it. Everyone goes through that cycle. So that is my second point. The third advice, very important, again, so if you notice, all this are about people, by the way, is getting and retaining quality staff. So especially if you're a startup, Bhumika, it is very difficult to attract top talent, right? I mean, you're not Amazon or IBM or Google or Microsoft or whatever. So people will only come to you if they see some scope for growth. I mean, career growth, but career growth is of course linked to company growth. And you have to be extra careful that the team that you pick, because the initial team actually means a lot in a company, in a startup. The first team, they're the ones who are going to actually take it forward to the next level, right? So it's very important to have that. So getting them is important, as in hiring is important. I've made a lot of hiring mistakes initially, because I've tried every trick in the book to try to pick the right staff. It almost never worked, to be honest. It's always hit and miss, right? So getting quality staff was a big challenge, and retaining them was a big challenge, because as a startup, you can't pay sky-high salaries, right? You can't even pay sometimes market salaries. So how do you get and retain quality staff? And I found the best way, again, goes back to what I said earlier, people management, right? And the proper culture. I think after a long while, it took about, many, many years, 5-6 years probably, before we actually locked down on a proper culture and the culture, by the way, is top down, it's from the CEO down. So it actually started with me, which means I had to change the way I worked. So again, a lot of responsibility on the CEO, the leader, the founder. So I think the answer to that one is, of course, getting the culture right and working on yourself as a leader. And then automatically people will come and stay. The fourth learning I had, a challenge, was co-founders, right? Getting co-founders on board should be the right match. And I mean match in terms of aptitude as well as attitude, right? So luckily for me, my co-founder, we were complementaries, right? So if I was the hyperactive, social media friendly, extremely articulate, great in class kind of person, he was the opposite. Not that he was bad in class. He was the mature, down to earth, calm, collected, quiet, low profile, systematic, process oriented person, right? That is a brilliant mix. In terms of, so I could go and develop the business, grow the business, be the star, the face of the company, which you need, especially when you're growing. And he would be the back office operations, HR, IT, website, which are essential, because otherwise you can't scale. You cannot scale, and you can't grow, and you can't function really, right? So that is very important. I think that match, some people don't get right. And it's a challenge So people, how do they start up a company? Chalo, we all 4 engineering graduates in the same college. Let's get together. But have you really thought about whether you are a complementary match in terms of skills and aptitude and attitude? Probably not. Probably yes. I don't know. Maybe they should think more about that than just say, chalo, we have made good buddies. Good buddies don't always make the good colleagues.
Yeah.
Or startup co-founders, right? The other challenge, I wouldn't say challenge, and it's just one thing that I never thought about when I started the company was I didn't really have a formal exit plan, Bhumika,
Okay.
For me, Genesis was just, how do you say, a platform where I could be free and independent and I could make an impact.
Okay.
It wasn't something I say, what, chalo, after 5 years, I will sell it for so much million to target company. Which is, by the way, what a lot of people do when they start up companies. And I'm not saying it is good or bad, but if you can't stick with, not you can't, you may not want to stick with the company for your entire life, right? You may want to move on, do other stuff like I have done. I did 3 years ago. Now, if you have, and people get bored of doing stuff. Anything, if you do it for long enough, you might get bored. Which is what happened to me. I honestly got bored of teaching completely, which is if you tell my students, right? I was like, how could you say that?
How could you?
Exactly. You, et tu, Brute, you of all people, was passionate about teaching and CFA and impact and classes. But it gets to you after some time. So I'm more for mentoring these days, but another way of making an impact. So going back to the other point. So the point I was making about exit plans. So I didn't have exit plans. None of us had exit plans. We just enjoyed the journey, and it happened. Exit happened, right? Because someone said, wow, great company, great brand, great team, good location, and boom. So I think maybe having exit plan is useful because it makes you think through your business model and the way you will work and what you will do, right? So a lot of what we did initially was, on the go, on the fly. We were doing it because, that's what we thought was the best way of doing it.
That's a really good advice that you have given. In terms of,
in
terms of top-down culture, definitely, because I have seen managers and partners who preach a lot of stuff but do not practice that themselves. So that's a very important thing that we need. And also budding entrepreneurs who need to think more systematically, I would say, in terms of their co-founders or whoever.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. And so you were saying something?
So culture is so important. Absolutely, I agree with you. The other issue or challenge which I faced was difficulty in scaling the business because Genesis was a face-to-face training company, right? We weren't for the simple reason because we were driven by the realities of the local marketplace, where we had people who could afford face-to-face training, which isn't cheap, which still wasn't cheap then, right? In those days. So that was, and of course, not easy to scale the business when you have to stand in front of a class and teach, right? So I think people should sort of think maybe about, okay, how do you scale the business? How do you grow it? How do you use technology, for example? Right. And 2 more points, right, I had to talk to you about, which is the lack of coaches or mentors. So both myself and my co-founder, we were first generation entrepreneurs, right? We never started a company before. So we were all making mistakes for the first time, right? We were all doing things for the first time. So almost like reinventing the wheel. Now in retrospect, I wish someone had told us, listen, Binod, this is not what you do. This is what you do. Right. Or maybe they told me and I can say, you sort of, when you are founding a company, you sort of ignore a lot of advice, right? Just move on and do your own stuff. And I think I know my stuff, right? So I think I have 2 points within that 1 point. One is I'm not sort of trying to show off or anything, but when you're a CA, CFA, you've been there, done that, executive director of finance, you believe you know your shit. Right? You think no one should tell you anything, and you become overconfident. So I think in my case, it was a mix, and I'll be blunt about it. I'm very honest about these things. It was a mix of overconfidence, ego. Tell me, and if anyone came and told me, maybe, they should do it differently, I would say, what the hell, who are you to tell me, right? So that was one part. I think entrepreneurs should be very careful not to get deluded or, to get too serious about themselves.
Yeah.
And one way of sort of achieving that is by having mentors or coaches, or even by having a co-founder who would sort of hold up a mirror to you and say, listen, Vinod, I mean, or having a board or advisors.
Yeah.
I found that helped. So there were 3 co-founders, and we used to have board meetings once every few months, and that sort of helped, in sort of infusing you with a sense of reality of what you should do and how you should do it, right?
Yeah.
And the last issue was purely psychological, right? Which was self-awareness and self-management. So this whole concept of EQ that we hear about, right? Emotional quotient, right? EQ, emotional intelligence. It was never big in those days, a decade ago. It's picked up a lot these days. And I wish I'd known more about EQ much earlier, because everything from my playbook was IQ, performance, intellect, right?
Yeah.
Pick things up, do things, execute, move on. And boy, was I wrong, because that's not how people work, right? People don't work based on deadlines and PowerPoints and processes. They work based on emotions and generosity and warmth and empathy and things like that, which I wouldn't say I was totally lacking in. But when you spend 17 years in corporate life, right, managing teams and reporting to other people, you sort of lose it sometimes, right? Somewhere. So that was lacking. So I used to read a lot of books. At that point, I think I was reading a lot of books by Daniel Pink, and books by David Daniel Goleman on emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I used to have my co-founders talk to me, and some senior people in the company talk to me. And then I used to think about it. So a lot of introspection, which I never used to do, honestly, made me think, there's a big gap. Not a skills gap, because skills gap, I was not lacking in terms of skills. I was great in teaching, but an attitude gap, which was far more important. And that would only come with self-awareness and self-management, because like you said, right, managers and partners, culture, top down.
Yeah.
I find that the biggest problem, Bhumika, with managers, directors, CEOs, partners is that they think they are the best. And that feeling continues because no one gives them feedback.
True.
And no one gives them feedback because they're all surrounded by yes men and yes women.
Yeah.
Who keep telling them that, they are the greatest thing since sliced bread, and your God's gift to auditing or accounting or financial service or investment banking or whatever you want to call it. And these guys keep on believing that stuff. And as a result, they cut off from reality.
True.
In my case, what happened was we started running 360-degree reviews in my company, I think about 2015 or so. Okay. And that's when it came out that, wow, this company wasn't the greatest place to work. I wasn't the greatest boss, right? And that was a solid kick in the butt, because till then you believe, you believe in a lot of fiction, right? For lack of a better word. So to give you some numbers, the employee engagement rating of the company based on the anonymous survey that we ran in 2015 was 62%. I still remember the number, which wasn't wow. In my view, it wasn't wow. I mean, out of 100. And there were lots of improvements, basically about me and my co-founder and the culture and the process. And so it was hard to digest. It was humiliating. It was shocking. It was disappointing, right? Because you don't want to admit that you are shit at being a boss. But I'm harsh on myself, of course. I'm sure people wouldn't call me shit at being a boss, but that's just being me, right? Being overly self-critical. But then a lot of introspection, a lot of reading, a lot of discussion in the management team. And by 2016, when we ran the survey after 1 year, it was 88%.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. And 2 things came out of that. I still remember. One was, there was one question. There were about 60 questions asked. And one question was asked, would you recommend Genesys to a friend as a place, as a place where a friend would want to work? And 90% of the staff said yes.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. And the second was a WhatsApp message I got from a colleague, a junior colleague. She was in sales. She's still in sales.
Okay.
And she came to me and sent a WhatsApp message saying, "You are the coolest boss ever." And this is the same girl who 2 years ago was scared of me, terrified of me, and wouldn't talk to me, as in was scared of talking to me because wow, Binod. So there was this perception in the company that, wow, Binod, right? This guy is, he's like a robot, he's like a machine. Flawless, emotionless, blah, blah, blah. So that changed. So I became more human. And that was all because of self-awareness and introspection. So that was maybe that sort of lead me to the second question, the next question which you're going to ask me as well, right? So that is what my takeaway was in terms of challenges, right? I think if you're an entrepreneur who is very bright, come from IITs or some engineering college or something, or, it's very easy to get carried away by your own bullshit. Because you will not admit to yourself that you're wrong, and people around you may not even tell you that you're wrong because A, they want to keep you happy, and B, they may not even care enough to tell you. Luckily for me, I was surrounded by people who were bold enough to tell me, and they cared enough about me and the company. If you don't have this mix of, there's this, you've read this Panchachandra and all those Amar Chitra Katha tales from. We had this guy called Birbal, right, who used to work in the court of Emperor Akbar. And he was the only guy who used to tell things to Akbar's face, right, in the form of jokes or parables. And it now makes sense to me, right, because that is the only way Akbar would know reality. Because everybody else was so shit scared of having their heads or hands chopped off. But Birbal was the only guy, apparently, I don't know how true it is, who would stand up and say, you know what, Your Majesty, this is wrong, or this is not how you should do it. Of course, you're not an emperor, you're only a startup founder. But the mindset and the situation is very similar. Yeah. I know it's a very long answer, Bhumika, but that's
a really important section, to be honest, because we definitely underestimate the power of a feedback from both the employer side and the employee side as well. Because from the employee side, we can also ask our employer to give us feedback so that we know exactly where we need to improve. So that's really, really great answer that you gave right now. And because you were talking about how Genesys went on and it changed you as a person, so because you have mentored thousands of students, so what are the key factors which changed within you? Of course, we know that your mindset changed and you became more self-aware, but what other changes that you experienced as a person?
Yeah, I mean, good one, because I think about this all the time. The process of teaching, Bhumika, didn't change me too much, right? Because, at the risk of sounding very immodest, I was always exceptional as a teacher in class, right from the age of 26, when I delivered my first lecture to a CA intermediate class in auditing in Trivandrum, my hometown, which got rave reviews, right? So I knew I was good. What I did but I got better at teaching after starting Genesys. I got better at a few things. I got better at simplifying topics, as in coming down to the level of student. I wasn't always good at that. I would go at this level and assume that people knew the basics. But in a CFA class, as you know, if your basics are not sound, you can get very lost very soon, right? So I think I got better at simplifying topics, using stories, using diagrams, using the whiteboard more often. I also got better at because, the EQ factor, right? I told about self-awareness. I was always impatient and intolerant. I'm still quite impatient and intolerant, by the way. I don't think people change dramatically, right? But I understood that in class, people are paying you to teach them, right? And help them pass. So I got more understanding and supportive of students who were not that quick at picking up. And I became less impatient with students. I won't say not impatient at all, because I could still lose it. When someone asks you the same question for the 5th time, come on, man, can't you? I've told you. My joke was, what else do you want me to do? Sign language? I've explained it to you 3 times. I've drawn on the board. I've taken you to the Schwezer books, to the curriculum books. What else can I do? But anyway, so that's how my teaching improved. But where I got better, much better, relatively speaking, Bhumika, was as a leader, as a CEO, right? Because there it wasn't really about IQ, it was about EQ. So maybe before this transformation, my IQ was here, my EQ was here, very roughly speaking. I had to raise my EQ to a different level because, so basically I became less of a micromanager.
Yeah.
I became more trusting, more relaxed.
Mm.
I would be more tolerant with mistakes, more patient if people took longer to learn on the job, less judgmental about people. So I had this I still have hang-ups about fitness and health and, being athletic and adventurous and reading a lot and things like that. Of course, you can't expect people to be all like that, right? I mean, you can't, otherwise you would have a company full of Binod clones, and God knows that's not what anyone wants, right? Not even you want. I mean, so,
Okay.
but jokes apart, everyone hires their own clone. And I do that for the longest time because you want someone to agree with you, be like you, right? And then I thought that's not ideal because you want diversity of skills, right? If everyone is, for example, between me and my co-founder, so I would probably haven't hired him. He wouldn't have hired me, right? I mean, because
if we
was so different.
The same person.
But in reality, the complementarity worked in terms of work performance. So I think this diversity, not just diversity for diversity's sake, right? Just have women on the board, or that's, I think, just bullshit. Diversity for a reason. I think this cloning can be quite a dangerous thing to do, right? So going back to how I changed. So I went from being a very scary boss to a cool boss, like I mentioned, right? The WhatsApp message. I mean, performance was still critical, right? I mean, in class, in terms of the tutors, or in sales or marketing or whatever. But I realized that you can achieve that performance in friendly ways, right? You don't have to be a terror. You don't have to be a scary boss. And this change happened primarily because the company culture was being affected by my attitude, right? And I felt I must change in order to become the leader the company needed. So I think initially I was being very selfish in the way I behaved. Okay, this is what I will do. This is what I will act like. But then I thought, you know what? That's not what the company needs. That's not what the staff need, right? They need a different perspective, right? They don't own the company. You own the company, right? So you can't expect them to work like you. I used to work sometimes 18-hour days, weekends, because you own the company, and I was teaching as well, right, at the same time. But how can you expect a guy who doesn't have any stake in the company, who is at a junior level, right, who doesn't get the big picture, to have the same passion and purpose? So I think, Gary Vee, right, the famous. So Gary Vee said, he says something quite a few insightful things. One thing he said on LinkedIn some time ago, he said, don't expect the same purpose and passion from people unless they own the company. If you want them to have the same purpose and passion, give them a part of the company.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is very true, right? Of course, you wouldn't do that, right?
Of course.
So that's, I think, to answer your question, how did the process change me as a person? Less so in teaching, far so as a person, as a leader, right? As a colleague. And I'm glad I did. It was a painful transition, trust me. It wasn't. I mean, talking about it sounds like, oh, it's all slick and smooth and fast. No, it was 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It was up and down. It was, like I said earlier, it was frustrating at times, because you realize that, damn, you're not as good as you thought you were.
Yeah.
Right? It was humiliating at times when people come and tell you to your face. Because I think one thing that worked in my favor was, and I'm again not being immodest, and I've been told this by my management team, I always allowed people to criticize me. So there was this staff who used to work with me, and she was in a senior position, and she would come and tell me regularly in a polite, firm, helpful way how I should improve. And she would go back to her husband and tell her husband, this is what I told the CEO. And her husband said, that's it, you're getting fired. You're not going to last for more than a day or 2 days. Prepare to lose your job, because no one tells this. And this guy has been successful. He's been a corporate guy. You can't go, right? Highly qualified. You just can't walk up to him and tell him that this is not the way you do things, right? So she told, so we used to have a laugh about this, right? And I think the best thing I did was allow people to criticize and talk back to me, which even now I do, even with my team at CFA Emirates, a volunteer team. There is no hesitation. There should not be, fear should not be there, right? So yeah, that's the way it changed me. So again, probably a long answer to
No,
your
but
question.
it was worth it because micromanagement definitely is very annoying for
Hmm.
employees also because the boss is always there nagging you for little things, so gets very annoying. So yeah, we had to put it out there. So because we are talking about teaching and how it changed you as a person, so because you have mentored a lot of students both in India and the Middle East, so
Yeah.
what are some of the improvement areas that Indian students should work on? And how should they go about it?
Right. So you're coming to probably one of my top three favorite talking points, right? Which I
Okay.
talk about a lot on social media anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so I've taught mostly students the GCC. Of course,
Hmm.
I've taught students, CA students in India as well, but that was long ago.
Hmm.
Um, but my GCC students also includes a significant percentage of Indians, right? Because as you know,
Okay.
a lot of Indian
Yeah.
expats here.
Hmm.
And although I haven't taught Indians in India, I interact with them a lot via LinkedIn,
Yeah.
WhatsApp, emails, right?
Hmm.
Because of the connections and engagement I have on LinkedIn, for example.
Yeah.
Uh, so the issues, I'll give you the issues and the reasons, and I'll give you solutions as well. Yeah?
Hmm. Yeah.
Again, from my perspective, obviously. So issue, and again, not in a particular order, but one big issue I see, Bhumika, is language,
Hmm.
especially for Indians in India.
Okay.
See, many didn't study English at school, right?
Hmm.
And you can clearly see that in the written English, which I
Hmm.
see when they message me on LinkedIn or send me email. It's often riddled with glaring grammatical and other errors, right?
Yeah.
Now, I used to be critical about that, but now I understand where they're coming from.
Hmm.
These are kids from tier 2, tier 3 cities, right? Um, whether it's Indore or Trivandrum or Vijayawada or somewhere,
Hmm.
and they haven't worked in an environment, they haven't learned English at a young age. So English for
Hmm.
them is a totally foreign alien language.
Yeah.
And that's one issue.
Hmm.
And probably because of this, Bhumika, they lack confidence.
Hmm.
Probably because of poor communication skills, because they think, oh my God, what happens if I talk to the senior person and I screw it up and I comes across as a complete idiot?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That's the second issue.
Hmm.
The third issue, which I see a lot on LinkedIn, which I've mentioned before, is they have little or no idea about the importance of and the process of networking.
Yeah.
So, what do I mean by that? And we can go and talk about for the next few hours about networking and do's
Yeah.
and don'ts.
True. True. True.
But for example, well, first of all, you have to be on LinkedIn, which I think the majority are not. Majority of young grads are probably not, right?
Yeah.
I strongly suspect only the tier one guys, and that too, a certain percentage are on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
But such a useful platform, as you know very well,
Yeah.
for professional networking.
Hmm.
That's number one. And then once you're on LinkedIn, how do you engage, right? Who do you reach out to? How do you reach out to them, right?
Hmm.
So I get lots of requests, hundreds of requests a week, and that's fine. I accept all of them as far as I can. I don't judge. I don't discriminate. But then once in a while, you get this message saying, "Sir, here is my CV in PDF format. Please get me a job."
Yeah.
Or it's like, "Can you please hire me?" Now, if you had read my profile, you would know I don't run a company.
Yeah.
I can't hire anybody. But over and beyond that, I don't think anyone should recommend anyone or hire anyone that you hardly know, right?
Hmm.
And it's not meant to be discriminatory. I'm not being elitist or anything like that. Of course not. So I would gladly recommend my students, ex-students, for example, or
Yeah.
mentees, right? Because I've seen them in class, I've seen them outside class, I've seen their performance in CFA exams.
Hmm.
They've interacted with me. I know them as a person and as a student as well. But someone sitting in Delhi or Calcutta who I have not seen, I have no idea about, I can't recommend them, right?
Hmm.
And this is exactly what I tell them, politely but firmly. So first of all, I don't refuse to reply to anyone. I reply to every single person, which
Okay.
people tell me it's quite rare, which I find quite
It
astonishing.
is. It is.
Yeah, which apparently majority of influencers on LinkedIn don't reply.
Hmm.
And it's actually quite strange. I've sent out replies saying, "Sorry, I can't help you," politely but firmly. And people have come back to me in such a tone as almost I've helped them, like, "Thank you so much, sir. Grateful for your reply." Which, anyway, so, but I think hopefully that helps them, right? Hopefully that helps
Hmm.
them But that is the one major issue when we go in networking, right? They have no idea about how to go about it. The fourth issue I see is they lack the curiosity and courage to venture outside a certain very narrow trail, right?
Yeah.
So as a result, they simply follow the beaten trail in their careers, right? So, okay, and it happened to me. So a lot of the things I'm talking about happened to me. I'm not saying I was exempt. I can't be a hypocrite.
Yeah.
But so when you you do a CA, what next? Okay, you go into a company, become an accountant, or or you go into a big four firm, become an auditor. Yes, but then beyond that, what else, right? Other careers, other companies, other locations, other qualifications, right? I never thought about it because no one was there to advise me from a career counseling perspective. So maybe they should, and fortunately, you have Google, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when I was in my days, 28 years ago or 30 years ago, there was no facility like this. I mean, I was like a frog in a well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my world was just, what is the name of the guy who wrote the tax book? Vinod Singhania.
Yeah.
Vinod Singhania's tax books and MC Shukla's accounting books and some guy's costing books. And that's it. Nothing else beyond that, beyond the academics, nothing else, right?
Yeah.
So I find the issues, Bhumika, with students, Indian students in India, overall, they're very good, excellent, I would say, at taking exams. And that includes myself.
Yeah.
But poor at handling life, as in handling people, careers, life, health, fitness. And that is the issues, right? Now, why does this happen? So it's very easy to point out the faults, right? So I think that this happens. It happened to me. It's happening to many people. Number one reason is right from home to school to college, Bhumika, students are told to study hard.
Yeah.
Everything else, sports, health, fitness, hobbies, is secondary to getting a rank to get into the best university.
True.
Right? And again, you can't blame them because when you have 1.4 billion people, how do you stand out? So CA, CFA, rank, obviously, right? But that comes with at a price, right? It comes at a price, at a heavy price.
Yeah.
Second point is they overemphasize technical qualifications over soft skills. It's not changed. Even since the day I was doing my BCom, my pre-degree, it's not changed.
Yeah.
The recent example is of one famous edtech company trying to teach coding to small kids, right? I won't name the companies, but you can guess.
Okay. Yeah.
Third reason, we talked about issues, is even now, and this again, I have to blame employers for that. I can't blame parents. I can't blame students. Even now, employers in India prize the first attempt pass in CA and CFA, or the rank holders, right?
True.
If you don't have this rank, or if you haven't passed in first attempt, you don't exist.
Yeah.
As far as top employers are concerned, you don't make the cut. So parents are simply responding to the demand from employers, right? And again, you can't fault the employers also too much because when you have hundreds of thousands of candidates coming out every year, right? Whether engineering or finance or whatever, they have to have a screening system, right? And this, what do you call, first attempt or rank or top college is simply a screening system, which is very crude. It is flawed. But hey, if someone has heard of a robust and practical alternative, let's go and try it. No one has.
Yeah.
For the last 4 decades, I haven't come across anything else. And finally, solutions, right? So we talked about the issues. We talked about the reasons for the issues. Solutions is, I think, the education system. Our education system is deeply flawed. True. It's all about memorizing. It's all about ranks and first attempts and technical skills. And it won't change that quickly. So if the education system is flawed and it won't change for you or anyone else, which means you have to educate yourself, which means you have to take your career and your education into your hands. You can't outsource it to your parents or to the school or to the college system. And you must identify your weak spots and develop those skills. Now, this is actually a very big issue because I was talking to the HR manager, ex-HR manager of some big companies in India.
Okay.
And she was telling me exactly this. We have outsourced our lives to our parents.
Okay.
All of us have, right? I mean, all of us did.
Yeah.
India, it's very an Asian community. I mean, India, Korea, China, Japan. It's quite common, right? Like Western societies. The upside, of course, is that, you're taken care of, your welfare, health, right?
Yeah.
So you don't end up doing unproductive things or wasting your time or your life. The downside is that you don't discover yourself, you don't discover your passion or purpose or opportunities until it's too late.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem. I see that in Indian families everywhere, whether it's here or India, everywhere else, right? So this outsourcing of your career education to parents has happened a lot. And that unless you take back a certain amount of that to yourself, you will not control your destiny anymore. Because let's face it, by the time you finish school and you finish college, you're what, early 20s?
Yeah.
Your life is set in many respects, right? You've already spent, I know of engineers who said, I hated engineering. I just did engineering because my dad was an engineer or whatever, or maybe he was an engineer. He couldn't make it to engineering. And he was so insistent that I become an engineer. Yeah. Or families made, there was never a doctor and they badly wanted a doctor. So I became the bakra. I had to be a doctor.
Yeah.
Effectively, the kids become like the sacrificial goat, right? So that's the second solution. Again, not easy. The third solution, I think mentors can help. They can help a lot in the above what I told you, right?
Yeah.
And good mentors will give you unbiased advice. But then good mentors are also very hard to get.
That's true.
And you know that, right? And to be honest, Bhumika, identifying and engaging mentors is a science in itself. And if anyone wants to know how the science works, I would ask listeners to go to my website, www.therealfinancementor.com, and listen to my talk at a CFA event in September 2019 on closing the skills gap. It's almost an hour-long presentation I made where I talked not just about the gaps and why the gaps exist, but also the solutions. And one solution was mentoring.
Yeah.
And how should you go about, how do you identify a mentor? How do you engage the mentor? What are the do's and don'ts? I think if people bothered going through that, it'll solve. Why reinvent the wheel? I reinvented the wheel many times. I'm sure you've done it a few times as well. Yeah. Why do that if you can get someone who can say, you know what, do this, don't do that. Yeah. A mentor is not a coach. A coach is someone who will come to you and say, Chalo, tell me what are you feeling and all those things. No, a mentor is someone who will direct you.
Yeah.
A mentor is direct. A mentor is someone who's been there, done that, and someone you respect and look up to because you want to be in the same position that he is now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Simple as that. So with a mentor, there is no philosophical discussion. Or, all right. Why do we exist on? Why am I feeling this way? And
okay.
It's simple discussion about this is where I want to be. What are the pros and cons and how do I get there?
Right? Very practical. Yeah.
Very practical career-oriented advice.
That's a very progressive point. Like, since we are talking about it right now, I know a lot of people don't do that. Even I haven't thought about it myself. So that's a very progressive point that you have made. And I'm sure everyone would definitely listen to your talk on your website. And since we are talking about CFA, so what is that one common myth about CFA that you want to debunk?
I think there are a lot of common myths that come to it, right? But,
okay.
Many common myths, but interesting question, because I think the one common myth that myth I wish to demystify, right, is that CFA is the passport to finance. Candidates think that it'll get them into anything that's sexy in finance, investment banking, venture capital, private equity, advisory.
Yeah.
I suspect this is the main reason why people get into CFA in India, at least, right?
True.
As a result, you see a huge inflow into level 1. You also see many level 3 pass outs without the charter, both in the GCC, in the UAE, etc., and in India, because they don't have the requisite work experience.
Yeah.
Look, I understand the reason. Many people don't have the skills or the cash to get into a top business school and get an MBA. So for them, CFA is like an MBA proxy, right? It's like an MBA light. It's cheaper, easier to get into, and more convenient. But the brutal fact remains that for all the sectors I mentioned above, right? Careers in investment banking or venture capital or private equity advisory. If you want to get into a top firm like Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or Bain or Accenture or Deloitte, you better get an MBA from a top ranked college. Yeah. You have to. That's the fact. I'm not being elitist. I'm not being, being a snob.
Yeah.
I didn't get through my CAT as well. So I didn't get into my MBA. But fortunately, things worked out differently. So again, it doesn't mean that if you don't get MBA or IIM or IIT, that your life is finished. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. So going back to your question, so I think that's one reason why they don't have the skills, the cash, and you need to get an MBA. So the question comes: so where is CFA valid, right? Well, it's valid and valuable in precisely the sectors for which it was designed for, and which curriculum prepares you for, right?
Yeah.
So what are those sectors? Asset management, wealth management, and investment research, equity research, bond research. In any other field, CFA is either less relevant or not at all relevant. Like, trading, for example, or risk management, right? Or if you want to get deep into alternative assets, you have Kaya for that, right? Or if you want to get into, I could go on and on, right? Or corporate banking or retail banking, whatever. CFA doesn't really make much sense. I would suggest, in fact, there's a qualification which makes far more sense to people who want to get a basic in finance or grounding in finance, which is the CFA Institute Investment Foundation Certificate. It's been there for like quite a long time, 7 years, but people ignore that. It's not been heavily promoted, but now CFA Institute is heavily promoting that. And I see more and more people on LinkedIn posting their investment foundation certificate. You probably noticed that as well.
Yes.
Which I think is fantastic because it's probably what people need. Because I think for a lot of people who are in compliance or risk or back or middle office or some other area, you don't need the CFA. Unless, of course, you want to learn about it, which is different. Okay, I'm going to stop you from that. If you want to learn about asset management and valuation, feel free to spend 5 years of your life and 1,000 hours to do that. But if the requirement is to understand markets and asset classes, then investment foundation is perfect. And it's a great curriculum. It's all online exams. It's well written, and it's been there for actually quite a long time. The CBT for this course. So that's my biggest myth that I want to blow up. That CFA is the passport to finance, and I hope people will understand this point and be more realistic about it.
Very honest of you, and very practical advice as well. So let's talk more about you. You are an endurance athlete. You specialize in mountaineering, cycling, and whatnot. So people just, some people perceive such people as perfectionists. So I have two questions for you. One, how do you do that? And two, as a generation with the attention span of a goldfish, what are some of the practices that Gen Z should improve on to live a better life in general?
Right. So you had two questions there. Let me ask the first question. Answer the first question first, right? How did I do that, or how do I do that? By the way, this is the first time I've heard of endurance athletes being labeled as perfectionists. By the way, I don't know where you got that from. But I wouldn't call myself a perfectionist. But I'm very detail oriented when it comes to climbing mountains and cycling long distance. And that simply comes with the territory. For the simple reason that many things can go wrong with disastrous consequences at high altitude. So you prepare meticulously, whether it is training or diet or sleep or gear. I also love the outdoors, adventure, and nailing another summit or crossing another finish line. So the other reason I do this is the places I travel through or the people you meet are part of the adventure, right? I mean, languages, cultures, climates are so different. That is another fun part of it. Another weird reason why I would call it weird, because for the longest time, for about 8 years, if I didn't have a project, which is what I call my extreme adventures, by the way, project with a P. So I used to so my first project was Project Elevation, which was the Kilimanjaro climb in March 2011. So after that, I started naming all my adventures after projects. So everyone had anyway, so the reason I started doing these projects was if I did not have a project, I wouldn't work out. And consequently, I would get unfit. So I used to have this time for about 4 months of the year. I would train hard, go to a mountain, go to the gym, treadmill, blah, 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 lift weights for 5 months. And the rest 6-7 months, I would be like a couch potato and doing nothing, as in literally nothing, not even walking. That was not good. So I needed a goal to keep fit, and knowing that I had a 6,000 meter mountain to climb in 6 months really wonderfully concentrates your mind and got me off my lazy ass, right?
Yeah.
I use the past tense because for the last 2 years, I've been working out regularly, mountain or no mountain.
Yeah.
Other reason how I do that is I'm single, and that means, yeah,
Okay.
thankfully single with a big sigh of relief. Although some people will look at me and say, that's weird. Anyway,
Yeah.
maybe that's a topic for a different podcast interview. I'm single. That means no time is spent on family. Now, I've realized looking at my married friends, most of my friends are married,
Yeah.
that a lot of time is sucked up by family. Kids, wife, kids, friends, wife's friends, in-laws, outlaws, you name it, you have it. So that's not there. So that's the answer to why, and of course, other reason why I could do all the adventures is especially during my entrepreneurship years, right? Which is when I completed the bulk of my adventures. I had much more flexibility on taking leave. So that helped, right? You can call it one of the unexpected perks of being your own boss is apart from the CFA season when you can't take leave. So I never took leave between say January and May most of the time. But once the exam was over, chutti for me and students. They would be relieved and I would go off on my adventures. Now, the other question you had, interestingly, was, what better practices should Gen Z improve on to live a better life? I'd basically give bullet points, right?
Okay.
Read more.
Yeah.
Get fit. Eat and drink healthy. This on the physical side maybe. Be curious. Be look out, explore.
Yeah.
Be authentic, and authenticity is so important, at least for me.
Yeah.
Be true to yourself, and I try to be authentic. I've tried to be authentic on this interview. I try to be authentic as a public persona on in print or in social media, because people can see quickly through you if you're a fraud.
True.
Very quickly. And unfortunately, a lot of people have a mask. Don't have a mask, right? Develop resilience. Be mentally tough. Recover quickly from setbacks. Bounce back.
Yeah.
Very importantly, have a sense of humor. I think, and this is an important point because Bhumika, for one reason, I don't know why, engineers, finance, accounting chaps, they don't have a sense of humor. It's like, a certain part of their brain was removed at birth or something, and they're very bright. The left brain, very powerful, very bright, formulas, calculations, yes. But humor, no. So that I think is, and very importantly, I think last point would be, not the least, is be exceptional in one thing of value to others. That one thing of value could be in teaching or in designing code or being a mentor or podcaster. But one thing you got to be brilliant at. One thing. You don't have to be brilliant at many things, and you can't be brilliant at many things. It's impossible. So if you ask me, Binod, can you swim? I can't. I'm shit at swimming. I'll probably drown in the water, right? Okay. Can I ski? I can't ski, right? Am I good with IT or computers? I'm horrible. I don't mind admitting it. I don't care about it because I know I'm very good at a few things. I think people try to be an all-rounder, right? Unfortunately, life is not cricket, where you got to be big, you got to be great at bowling and fielding and batting. I think you need to be good at one thing, and one thing which you are probably in the top 10% of, I wish no one that you know is better than you.
Yeah.
That's how you can start up something. That's how you'll progress in your career as well. That's been my mantra. So my mantra has been communication with a capital C from day one.
Yeah.
If you ask me what's my skill, it's not really teaching or podcasting or posting or blogging. If you look at the behind, if you go back, right, the key skill is communicating.
True. Yeah.
That's worked for me, but other things can work for others, right? So yeah.
Some really important points, and of course, communication and networking is like really essential, especially in these times. So yeah, really interesting points. So because you talked about being honest, and you are one of the most honest person I know. So, and your post on LinkedIn, of course, has been really authentic and honest. So what has been your mindset about those posts? And tell us something more about your podcast, The Real Finance Mentor. Yeah.
Will do. First, the mindset, right, behind this post that you see. So, firstly, I have the unique luxury, and I must stress on this because some other people don't have it. Most people don't have it. I have the unique luxury, Bhumika, of not answering to anyone, right?
Yeah.
I have no boss, no clients, no suppliers, no employees, no wife, okay, no in-laws. So this is an extremely rare freedom, which means I don't have to be scared of pissing off anyone.
Yeah.
Right? Jokes apart, right? And this is not there for a lot of people because a lot of smart people, probably people smarter than me, can't say it out. They say it to me in private, by the way. They talk to me in private and say, you know what, I completely agree with you, Binod, but I can't say it in public. Because my boss or company or whatever it wouldn't go down well. Which I think, of course, is a pity. But I have it. I have it for a limited period till however long I'm on this earth. And I want to leverage this and say essential stuff that few can or will say. That's number one. So people need to know again. So this podcast hopefully will tell people that, how I'm able to do it, right?
Yeah.
It's also important that people know that background. Again, I don't want to become a hypocrite. Secondly, I want to make an impact. I think by being authentic and honest, you can make an impact because people see that, okay, if he was a failure in pre-degree and BCom and he is where he is now, you don't have to have a great past to have a great future.
Yeah.
You don't have to. You don't have to be a rank holder. You don't have to go to IITs or IIMs or go to SRCC or wherever. you don't have to, right?
Yeah, that's true.
You don't have to. I mean, great, fantastic if you can. Brilliant. Great work, amazing work, and hopefully that will take you further in your career. And I really admire, respect people like that. But you don't have to be there, right? I also don't want anyone, Bhumika, to reinvent the wheel. And we talked about that earlier, right? When you talk about entrepreneurship and careers and EQ. I also want to stand out from the fake stuff and nonsense you see on social media, which can get, downright mediocre to downright, misleading and dangerous. People saying, meme stuff, right? I mean, people think everything can be reduced to a meme. Or everything is like a few words it sounds cute and short and sweet, but it's absolutely wrong because life is not cute, short, and sweet. Life is complex.
True.
And you can't reduce life to a few sentences. So I don't try and do that. I try to, if you look at my post, I try to give the rationale, the explanation, the caveats. And I try to debunk some of those myths as well. I also want to ensure, Bhumika, that CA and CFA brand quality is maintained by future candidates, right? So this whole passport to finance myth, or that, that's all those things that happen to people, or the employability myth, or the lack of work readiness, or the communication issues. I mean, I want to ensure that the qualification that I hold is always held in high esteem forever, universally. It's for everyone's benefit. Of course, my benefit as well. So I just tell them, you know what, guys, I've been there, done that. Okay. I know where you guys are. I understand that, but don't do this. Okay. Because it will affect all of us. It's not just you, right? It will affect all of us. It's a community. It's a community, right? So for example, when chartered accountants accept absurdly low salaries, it's a reflection on the CA profession. Right? When a CFA charter holder publishes a wrong research report and the press talks about it, it affects the whole profession. So I think people sometimes get sucked into their own narrow livelihoods and don't think about the big picture, which ultimately includes them as well, right? In the long run.
True. Yeah.
Right? So that is there. Of course, I like an audience who doesn't like likes and comments and shares. That's not the main driver. It's never been the main driver. I don't think it should be the main driver. But no, I'm not like Saint Binod Shankar, who is like sitting on a mat in the Himalayas and blogging daily and basically unconcerned about the responses. And of course, lastly but not the least, it always bugs me being a hypocrite. So I hate being a hypocrite, right? So I go out of my way to deliberately talk about my weaknesses and failures. And no one that I know does that. Maybe other people do. So I talk about the fact that, pre-degree, lousy score, couldn't get into engineering, BCom, skipped classes, couldn't get into CAT, tried twice, right? And then, of course, CA followed. But I want people to see what the failures that happened before the success, right? Because I think in my case, my success happened because of the failure. I think I've become so driven, so obsessed, so determined that I would not be humiliated again, at least by academic failure.
Yeah.
I pulled up my socks and smashed through CA and CFA as well. So that is this sort of not become a hypocrite. And some of these episodes in my life, so even now, Bhumika, I get WhatsApp messages from people saying, or LinkedIn messages saying, you know what, that post you made 2 years ago about you getting down from a bus on a rainy day and trudging uphill to a college to get admission to BCom course. You know, that I still remember that day, which happened, by the way, 35 years ago. But I still remember it as though it happened last month. It remains with you. So again, these are the reasons why I think, you know, the mindset that drives me to make this post. And of course, you talked about the RFM, right? The Real Finance Mentor podcast, which was actually another reason, well, another way of making an impact, another way of sort of implementing my mindset that I talked about, right? So many students and many young finance professionals have similar problems. We know this, right?
Yeah.
But they all think that they're alone in the situation. They're unable to think of solutions, end up being very lost, listless, and quite a few of them actually get depressed.
Yeah.
I've been reached out to many students over the last 2 years. Sir, I'm depressed. I'm lonely. I feel down. What should I do? So I thought, you know what? This response, this engagement, this confusion that people face, this distinct lack of mentorship and guidance that people have faced in career in accounting or finance, right? I said, let me develop some content that is authentic and relatable, right? About my personal experience. And there's a lot. And how I made it after a struggle. And let's talk about a podcast where it's about issues and also practical solutions and hope.
Yeah.
Hope being very important, right?
Yeah.
So why listen to the podcast? 4 key reasons, right? One is I relate very fluently to my audience. I understand the issues and I know the solutions because I've been there, done that. Number 2, and you know this very well, right? I will not have bullshit or, you know, euphemisms or political correctness to the point where the meaning or the essence is completely lost. I find that a lot of the time people talking to you, or people posting stuff, and I think, what are you trying to say? What is the point you're trying to make here?
True.
You know?
Yeah.
Number 3, of course, my background is very varied, right? I mean, CA, CFA, corporate life, entrepreneurship, teaching, leadership, then endurance activities. So I think that all, so when I go to the mountain, I used to think about running a company, right? Or classes or CFA, and how, and what lesson can I convey to my students when I get back?
Yeah.
Right? About endurance, mental toughness, dealing with failure. And I've failed on the mountains as well. So it's a package, right? It brings a lot of interesting experiences. And last but not the least is I did my research before I launched the RFM podcast, Bhumika. There are tons of good podcasts on soft skills. You know that, right?
Yeah.
On how to invest, on stock markets, on, and my God, so many on entrepreneurship, right? There are like millions.
Yeah.
But you'll be surprised and shocked to find out almost none on finance careers. Okay. Well, few on careers itself, and even almost none on finance careers. So 4 reasons why I thought my podcast would be relevant for my audience, right?
Yeah. And it has been doing really good. And I'm sure a lot of people will go to the podcast and listen to it. So you are, besides podcasting, as you mentioned earlier also, you are someone who reads a lot of books, and I have seen a lot of book recommendations on LinkedIn. So how reading has helped you to become the person you are right now? And give us some book recommendations.
I think both of us are on the book reading race, right?
Yeah.
I see you post book number 40. I said, man, I'm only in 38. So how reading helped me? Interesting. It's helped me. I think it's helped me a lot more than it's helped other people that I know. Maybe because of my peculiar situation. So I'm a single child, right? So as a single child growing up with a single parent, my best friends were books for the longest time. It started with fiction books, you know, Agatha Christie and things like that.
Yeah.
And then in my teens, it became more pulp fiction, paperback. But about my early 20s, it switched to nonfiction, where it remains ever since. So I think that is one reason. But how did reading help me? Number one, I learned a lot about psychology, leadership, and EQ. So, we've talked about earlier how I changed as a leader. I think a lot of it I can thank the authors I read. Daniel Goleman, Daniel Pink, all those people. I mean, amazing books on leadership and behaviors. Secondly, I mean, whenever I felt down or disengaged, I used to read books, especially the funny books, right? And I've been through some, like for example, I remember going through tough times in audit. Audit, how the deadlines, the managers. And I used to come home in the evening and say, oh my God, what can I do? So then we didn't have internet. We're talking 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah. I used to grab some funny books to read. And trust me, Bhumika, the relief it used to give me, I can't even explain. I used to actually look forward at work to coming back and reading the books.
I can relate.
It was so stressful, and the books were such a relief, right? The third reason is when I go climbing or cycling in the mountains, and in your tent at night, and trust me, it gets very cold, very dark, and very lonely. There's no internet, nothing. Books were the best companion. So I used to have my headlamp and take a book, and you drift off into some other world of, I don't know, psychology or anthropology or something. So that is quite helpful. Of course, books were always very useful for my classes, my webinars, my LinkedIn posts, my interviews. You get a lot of useful information from there, right? When I mentor people, for example. And sometimes I just read a book just for the heck of reading, right? Not because it's going to give me any value. I'm sure you've experienced the same thing as well, right?
Yeah.
You don't read it because you're going to apply it tomorrow or next year, or it's going to help you in your career. No, just because it's a fascinating topic, and you're intrigued by that topic or that author, right? So you can call it intellectual entertainment, right? For lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And of course, as I mentioned earlier, best friend for a single person is a book. So I think I have lots of reasons to read books. It's also probably one reason why during this lockdown and, what's happened the last 9 months, a lot of people have complained about feeling lonely, not meeting people, cut off. I'm like, what are they talking about?
Okay.
Because, I have a routine, obviously. I have a routine, reading, blogging, working out, and looking at markets. But then I have books. And books, whenever you feel lonely or tired or zoned out, just pick a book and you can read it. And books are always there for you. Unlike a friend, they won't disappear anywhere. Right? They won't act moody, or they won't have attitude, right?
Yeah.
You can open the mood wherever. I can go on and on.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my love affair. Now, book recommendations, well, really can't go into recommendations. Actually, it depends on what you're looking for, right? But I think the best place, Bhumika, is my website. Like I said, therealfinancementor.com, where I post all my book reviews.
Yeah, and also LinkedIn.
And LinkedIn as well. Exactly. On LinkedIn as well. Absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out. LinkedIn. And so I post the book reviews detailed about 1,200 words on an average. I give my own very subjective rating of each book. I list the overview, key points, what I liked, what I didn't like, and conclusion. So, and there's a variety of topics. So I think people can pick and choose. Of course, all nonfiction. You won't find, what do you call, what is the name of the Gone Girl or books like that over there?
Yeah. Even I have not read that. Yeah. I'm also mostly into nonfiction.
Exactly. We are like-minded that way, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So my last question to you is, if you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him? And relating to that, what is the most important thing that you have learned in life? And what was your life like before learning it and after learning it?
Wow, that's a big one. When you send these questions to me, I was like, okay, where do I start, right? But your question was, what is the most important thing you have learned?
Yeah.
I will tell you a few important things I've learned.
Yeah.
I think even there's a ranking, right? And I would say it's difficult to rank, but I would say the most important thing for me, I wish I had been more curious. I wish I had questioned and challenged things more. I wish I had challenged parents, friends, colleagues, bosses, conventional wisdom before, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm doing now, right? So I was quite passive in a way before. Right now, I'm proactive because of that. So I think that's and being proactive, it sounds very simple. It's a single word, but trust me, it opens your doors to many things in personal and professional life, from CFA to mountaineering to whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I think being curious. Secondly, and I say these mistakes, these are things I didn't do, right? Have a career strategy. Why CA? What next? Right? So before, my life was follow the crowd, right? Typical life, right? Do CA, become a finance manager, hope to become CFO or partner in a big four firm. That's what typically people go after, right? But I'm not saying don't go after that. I mean, that field is probably overcrowded. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Everyone and his dog, every Tom, Dick, and Harry is trying to become a partner or become a CFO or a CEO. So do something else, maybe follow your heart and mind. Not just mind, follow your heart as well, but both. I mean, like someone said, right? Follow your heart, but take your mind with you. Right? So yeah. So number two. Thirdly, I mean, I always used to eat healthy, right? Well, since my teens, my mother was very health focused, but I was never so fitness focused. I would say my fitness focus started in my late 30s, if you can believe it, right? It was never that important. I was often lackluster, but after that, now I have a daily routine. It's an energizer for me. I start the day with it, and the day is fantastic. Whatever happens. The good thing about fitness is, if you start your day with it, then whatever happens later, at least you did one good thing in the day.
Yeah. That's really true.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I agree.
If later the day or later in the week, or you don't do it, then
if you miss it, then that's the worst part. If you miss it, then at night also you would be like, why did I miss it? I could have done it.
Yeah,
and then
exactly. And of course, the mood boosting effects of exercise and things like that, which right? Which also happens. So that is, but I wish I started earlier. Fourth thing I wished I had done before, accepting my mistakes, right? I was very egoistic. I'm sure a lot of people are. Okay, I'm not the only one. It was very difficult for me to accept my mistakes. I was quite defensive. I was quite sensitive. I would hit back at people who criticized me, and later realized that what they said was more often right than wrong. Which I'm still defensive, but far less so, and I'm much more introspective, right? So when people tell me something, I don't react immediately. I think about it, and then I say, okay, and I try to change. So that has changed a lot. I wish I was like this when I was in my 20s, where I thought, chartered accountancy passed, first attempt, king of the world, nothing else in life. Seriously, right? At the age of 23, you think you've passed, you've nailed CA, and that's it. What else is there, right? I mean, that's it. So that was, I think, so accepting mistakes. Fifth point, I wish I'd realized or known that EQ is as important, if not more important or crucial than IQ. Before as I told you, I lacked self-awareness and self-management, right? Relatively. Now, these days, for the last few years, ever since my awakening, I know what I feel and why and how I can change it. So when I get angry or upset, I am able to A, sense it immediately, and B, talk myself out of it. A lot of the time, which never happened before, So, and I talk myself out because of, how do I say, awareness of what I should be doing, and not letting myself down, and also awareness of my impact on other people. So my mother, for example, or students or friends. And I think, no, if you say this, it will impact them this way, That doesn't mean again that I'm evolved human being and I've achieved nirvana. No way. Okay. No way. Right. And one thing, of course, is treat people like they want to be treated, not like you want to be treated. So, there's this saying, Bhumika, right? I'm sure you've heard about it, treat people like you want to be treated. That's actually wrong. Because everyone's different. And while I was okay being treated in a, like, for example, if people told me be healthy, exercise, work out, work hard, work weekends, I'll be fine. But some other person would not be fine with it because of he's different, right? Or she's different. So everyone's different, like the 5 fingers of your hand, right? So I think treating people, I used to treat people indifferently initially. Then I used to treat them like later. I evolved to treating them like I wanted to be treated. Now I try and treat people like I think they want to be treated.
Okay.
Which is a wholly different ball game, by the way, because I need to understand Bhumika in order to interact with Bhumika impactfully and meaningfully.
Yeah.
Because Bhumika is not the same as Mahima or Garima or somebody else. And that is a challenge for all leaders, by the way, and all managers, because they don't have the time or the patience to do this. They act with everyone the same way.
Yeah.
Some people will be okay. Some people will be very not okay. Yeah. Of course, just in case anyone thinks I'm too full of myself, because I have to say in one podcast of mine that happened, interview happened in, I think, July. Somebody heard it and she messaged me on LinkedIn saying, I think you're too arrogant. And I said,
okay.
I don't think I was arrogant, because in all my interviews and public and even internally, I know I have flaws. I know I have failed. I know I've made mistakes. So I don't know. I said, what phrase or what? She said, I can't remember. And I said, listen, I apologize if I came across arrogant, because it wasn't, of course, it was like I was talking in the interview. I didn't know that she was listening, but I wouldn't say that. So even in this interview, I don't want to come across as being full of myself. And I want to stress that I'm so far away from where I want to be, right?
Yeah.
At least in terms of, EQ and awareness. I mean, I still make mistakes. I still revert to old behaviors, right? It's very difficult to shake off decades of conditioning.
Yeah.
It's difficult. Also, you can't really dramatically change who you are fundamentally, right? If you are a potent personality like, ENTJ as per the Myers-Briggs type indicator or whatever, you can change probably 20-30% here and there, right? I mean, you can be flexible, or as someone said in a book I read recently, you can stretch yourself if you need to. But fundamentally, you will always remain like that, so you can't change too much. But I do try and stretch out of my comfort zone when needed, which is not comfortable, by the way, obviously. I mean, as you can imagine, it's not comfortable, which is what it's supposed to be. But I try and do that. And I try and embed some habits as well, right? So I try not to lose my patience. I try to be tolerant. I try to be less judgmental. I try to think of the other person's shoes, which is all, of course, quite new to me. It's an interesting journey. Let's see.
It was an amazing conversation, and I'm sure there is a lot of wisdom in it, and almost all of the students will benefit from it. So thank you so much for being with us, Vinod, and please make sure that you follow Vinod on his podcast, The Real Finance Mentor, and also go through his website for all the crazy book recommendations and a lot of other stuff. So thank you, Vinod.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bhumika, for having me on this show. I mean, lots of interesting questions. Some questions have never been asked before. Some questions which made me think hard as well. So I hope it will be impactful, insightful, and inspirational to the listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you.